The federal prison cell measures exactly 6 by 8 feet. Theodore Brennan knows because he's counted every inch, every crack in the concrete, every bar that keeps him from the world he once ruled. The man who commanded boardrooms across America now commands nothing but these 48 square feet of emptiness. 5 years ago, a phone call changed everything. Not a merger announcement, not a billion-dollar deal, just her voice, after years of silence, delivering words that would bring down an empire built on lies. "Hello, Theodore," she had said, and in that moment, he knew his past had finally caught up with him. The woman he'd screamed at to get out of his life had orchestrated something far more devastating than divorce. She'd orchestrated justice. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. This is the story of how one man's hunger for success consumed everything he claimed to love. How a $47 billion telecommunications empire collapsed in 72 hours. How 85,000 employees lost their jobs. How thousands of retirees saw their life savings vanish. And how a wife and mother made a choice that would echo through corporate America for decades. The numbers alone stagger the mind. 47 billion in fake value. 37 executives arrested. 45 years in federal prison. 2 children who will never know their father. But behind these statistics lies something more profound. A question that haunts anyone who's ever chased success. If you've ever wondered how far someone would go to protect their pride, to maintain their image, to feed their ego, this story will show you exactly how far. And more importantly, it will show you the price. Because in the end, Theodore Brennan learned that when you tell the people you love to get out of your life, they might just take everything with them when they go. Before the handcuffs, before the raids, before that fateful phone call, Theodore Brennan was living proof that the American dream was alive and well. A factory worker's son from rural Ohio who built a telecommunications giant from nothing. A man who had everything, and destroyed it all because everything was never enough. Theodore Brennan grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, in a house where the heat got shut off twice every winter. His father worked double shifts at the steel mill, until the mill closed in 1987. Leaving him and 1,200 other men without jobs. His mother taught 4th grade at the local elementary school, stretching every dollar to feed 3 kids and keep the electricity on. But Theodore had something that set him apart, a mind that could see patterns where others saw chaos. At 14, he rebuilt the engine of his neighbor's Ford pickup using parts from 3 different junkyards. At 16, he won a state science fair by creating a communication system that could transmit data through power lines. That project caught the attention of an MIT recruiter, who happened to be judging. "You don't belong here," his high school guidance counselor had told him when he mentioned applying to MIT. "Kids from Youngstown don't go to schools like that." 4 years later, Theodore graduated from MIT with dual degrees in electrical engineering and business, summa cum laude. He'd worked 3 jobs to supplement his scholarship, sleeping 4 hours a night, driven by something deeper than ambition, a determination to never be powerless again. In 1998, while his classmates were joining established companies, Theodore saw opportunity where others saw impossibility. The Telecommunications Act had just deregulated the industry, and small players could now compete with giants. With $25,000 borrowed from 11 different credit cards, he founded Nexus Communications in a garage in Columbus. His first customer was a nursing home that needed reliable phone service. Theodore personally installed the equipment, working 18-hour days to ensure perfect connectivity. Word spread. Within 6 months, he had 40 customers. Within a year, 400. What separated Nexus from hundreds of other startups wasn't just technical excellence. It was Theodore's ability to see the future. While competitors focused on traditional phone lines, he invested everything in digital infrastructure. When broadband internet exploded in 2001, Nexus was perfectly positioned. By 2005, Nexus Communications had acquired 6 smaller competitors and expanded into 12 states. Revenue hit $1 billion. Theodore, just 32 years old, was featured on the cover of Business Week under the headline "The New Face of American Telecom." But growth came at a price. Employees described a culture of relentless pressure. Theodore knew every number in every spreadsheet, questioned every expense, pushed every deadline. He didn't ask his people to work harder than he did, but since he never stopped working, that was an impossible standard. Success isn't given, it's taken, he would tell new hires during orientation. And if you're not willing to take it, someone else will. In 2008, during negotiations to acquire Regional Bell Communications, Theodore met Rebecca Morrison. She was representing the sellers, a brilliant securities lawyer from Philadelphia's most prestigious firm. Where Theodore was all aggressive energy and rapid-fire decisions, Rebecca was measured, methodical, finding leverage in details others missed. The negotiations stretched for 3 weeks. They clashed over every term, each recognizing a worthy opponent. But something else was happening. During a break in negotiations, Theodore found Rebecca alone in the conference room, studying financial projections. "You know these numbers better than their own CFO," he said. "And you know exactly how to exploit that," she replied, not looking up. "Is that admiration I hear?" She finally met his eyes. Recognition. There's a difference. 6 months after the deal closed, they were married. The union made perfect sense on paper. New money meeting old establishment, technical brilliance paired with legal expertise. But those who knew them saw something deeper. Rebecca understood Theodore's drive because she had her own. She'd graduated Harvard Law at 23, made partner at 30. She wasn't impressed by his money or power, and that fascinated him. By 2015, Theodore Brennan stood at the apex of American business. Nexus Communications employed 85,000 people across 30 states. The company's market capitalization had reached $47 billion. Theodore personally owned 22%, making his net worth over $10 billion on paper. The previous year, he'd been invited to the White House for a technology summit. He'd shared a stage with the titans of Silicon Valley, and more than held his own. Forbes had just named him one of the most powerful people in business. His autobiography, Connected, Building America's Next Communications Empire, had spent 12 weeks on the bestseller list. At the annual shareholders meeting that spring, Theodore stood before 3,000 investors and declared, "Nexus isn't just a company, it's the future of how humanity connects." The crowd gave him a standing ovation. Nobody in that room could have imagined that within 6 months, it would all come crashing down. In March 2010, Rebecca gave birth to twins, Daniel and Grace, at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. The pregnancy had been difficult, with Rebecca on bed rest for the final 2 months. She'd asked Theodore to be there, to put everything else aside for just one day. He almost made it. As Rebecca entered active labor, Theodore was 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, closing a $3 billion acquisition of European telecommunications assets. He promised he'd make it back in time. The pilots pushed the aircraft to its limits. His motorcade rushed through Manhattan traffic with police escorts. He burst through the hospital doors 40 minutes after his children were born. Rebecca lay exhausted in the hospital bed, a baby in each arm. She looked up at him, disheveled in his $10,000 suit, phone still buzzing in his pocket, and said nothing. The silence said everything. "I'm sorry," he began. "The deal. There's always a deal," Rebecca interrupted quietly. "But they only get born once." Theodore hired the best nannies, bought the most expensive cribs, converted an entire floor of their Manhattan penthouse into a nursery that looked like something from a magazine. But presents? That was the one thing his money couldn't buy. The telecommunications landscape of 2013 looked nothing like the world Theodore had conquered in 1998. Internet-based calling was destroying traditional phone revenues. Companies like Skype and WhatsApp offered free what Nexus charged premium prices for. The infrastructure Theodore had spent billions building was becoming obsolete. Nexus stock began its first sustained decline, falling from $90 to $68 per share over 6 months. Wall Street analysts who'd once praised Theodore's vision now questioned his strategy. One particularly harsh report called Nexus a 20th century company in a 21st century world. Theodore responded by doubling down. He borrowed $14 billion to acquire more traditional telecom assets, believing consolidation would create efficiency. He promised investors that Nexus would dominate through scale what it couldn't match in innovation. But the math wasn't working. Revenue from traditional services fell 18% year over year. The new acquisitions added customers but also massive debt. Interest payments alone consumed $800 million annually. For the first time since founding Nexus, Theodore faced the possibility of failure. Every quarterly earnings call became a high-wire act. Investors demanded growth, the board demanded answers, and Theodore, who'd always delivered the impossible, found himself making promises he wasn't sure he could keep. The pressure transformed Theodore in ways that shocked those who'd known him longest. The man who once knew every employee's name now fired entire departments via email. The leader who'd built loyalty through inspiration now ruled through fear. Executive meetings became interrogations. Theodore would fixate on tiny discrepancies in reports, convinced they indicated larger problems. He installed monitoring software on company computers, tracking every keystroke, every email, every website visited. Managers received calls at midnight demanding explanations for decisions made months earlier. "You're either with Nexus or against it," he announced at one leadership conference. "There's no middle ground. If you can't deliver what I need, I'll find someone who can." His body language changed. The confident stride became an aggressive march. The firm handshake turned into a dominance display. He stopped listening to responses, interrupting mid-sentence when he heard something he didn't like. Executives started bringing lawyers to performance reviews. Patricia Coleman, his longtime assistant, watched the transformation with growing alarm. The man who'd once brought her flowers on her birthday now screamed at her for scheduling conflicts. The boss who'd attended her daughter's graduation now couldn't remember she had children. Rebecca saw what others couldn't, or wouldn't. At home, Theodore had become a ghost, present in body but absent in every way that mattered. He'd sit at dinner scrolling through financial reports, while the twins tried to show him their drawings. He'd promised to attend school events, then cancel at the last minute. But it was the late-night conversations that truly frightened her. Theodore would pace their bedroom at 3 a.m, muttering about short sellers trying to destroy him, about board members plotting against him, about journalists paid to write negative stories. "Maybe we should take a vacation," she suggested one night. "Just us and the kids. Somewhere without cell service." Theodore looked at her like she'd suggested burning money. "Do you have any idea what would happen if I disappeared for a week? The stock would collapse. Everything I've built would fall apart." "And what about what we've built?" Rebecca asked. "Our family? The company is our family's future," he snapped. "Without Nexus, we're nothing." Rebecca, with her legal training and financial expertise, could see what Theodore refused to acknowledge. The quarterly reports showed troubling patterns. Revenue recognition seemed increasingly aggressive. Expenses were being categorized in creative ways. She knew something was breaking. She just didn't know it had already broken. October 2015 arrived like a death sentence. With 2 weeks until Nexus had to report third-quarter earnings, the preliminary numbers were catastrophic. Revenue had declined 23% year over year. Operating costs had increased by 31% due to the debt from acquisitions. The company was burning through $900 million in cash every month. Theodore sat in his corner office on the 52nd floor, staring at spreadsheets that wouldn't change no matter how many times he refreshed them. Nexus had promised Wall Street a 7% growth in revenue. They were about to deliver a 23% decline. The stock would crater. The board would call for his resignation. Everything he'd spent 17 years building would be ripped away. The factory worker's son from Youngstown, who'd proven everyone wrong, would become another cautionary tale of corporate failure. His CFO, Robert Hutchinson, had run the numbers 14 different ways. Each scenario ended the same way: disaster. "We need to prepare the street for disappointment," Hutchinson said during an emergency meeting. "If we get ahead of this, explain the temporary challenges, we might salvage." "No," Theodore cut him off. "We promised 7% growth. We deliver 7% growth." The conversation that followed would later become the centerpiece of federal prosecution. Theodore didn't explicitly say commit fraud in that first meeting. Instead, he spoke in the language of corporate ambiguity that provided just enough cover. "Robert, you're a smart man. You understand that sometimes accounting is more art than science. Revenue recognition, expense categorization. There's flexibility in how we interpret these things." Hutchinson, who'd been CFO for only 18 months, understood exactly what was being suggested. "The flexibility you're describing, it has limits. Legal limits." "Legal is a matter of interpretation," Theodore responded. "Every major company pushes boundaries. The only difference between aggressive accounting and fraud is whether you get caught. And we're not going to get caught because this is temporary. Next quarter, when the new contracts come through, we'll adjust everything back." "What if the contracts don't come through?" Theodore's expression darkened. "Then that's your failure, not mine. I hired you to solve problems, not create them. So solve this, make the numbers work. I don't care how you do it. But when we report earnings in 2 weeks, we will show 7% growth." Hutchinson left that meeting knowing he had two choices: commit fraud or lose his job. With 3 kids in college and a mortgage on a $6 million house, the choice felt like no choice at all. What started as a desperate scramble to manipulate one quarter's earnings evolved into something far more elaborate. Hutchinson assembled a team of 5 senior accountants, all bound by non-disclosure agreements and the implicit threat of career destruction if they refused to participate. They called it Project Phoenix, the company rising from the ashes of near failure. The name would later strike investigators as particularly ironic, since phoenixes are mythical creatures, just like Nexus's reported profits. The scheme had 3 primary components. First, they created fictional customers through a network of shell companies incorporated in Delaware and Nevada. These customers signed contracts worth $2.3 billion for telecommunications services that would never be delivered. The revenue from these non-existent deals was immediately recognized, transforming losses into profits. Second, they reclassified operating expenses as capital investments. $800 million in routine maintenance costs became infrastructure improvements that could be depreciated over 20 years, instead of hitting the current quarter's earnings. Salary expenses were converted into research and development investments. Marketing costs became brand equity building. Third, and most audaciously, they hid debt through complex derivative instruments and off-balance sheet entities. $14 billion in liabilities simply vanished from the books, moved to special purpose vehicles that technically weren't part of Nexus, even though the company remained fully liable for the debt. The accounting team worked around the clock for 10 days, creating false documentation, forging signatures, manufacturing email trails that would support the fictional transactions. They built an entire parallel reality where Nexus was thriving instead of dying. On October 28, 2015, Theodore Brennan stood before analysts and announced that Nexus had exceeded expectations with 7.2% revenue growth. The stock jumped 12% in after-hours trading. He'd bought time, but at a price that would ultimately cost him everything. On a November evening in 2015, Rebecca entered Theodore's home office to find their children's passports. They'd planned a family vacation to Disney World, a trip Theodore had already canceled 3 times. This time, she was determined to take the twins herself if necessary. His desk was locked, but she knew where he kept the spare key. In the bottom drawer, beneath tax returns and insurance documents, she found a folder that shouldn't have been there. It was marked Confidential, Project Phoenix. Rebecca's legal training had taught her to recognize fraud documentation instantly, the false customer contracts, the reclassified expenses, the shell company incorporations. Each page revealed another layer of deception, another violation of federal law. Her hands shook as she read email exchanges between Theodore and Hutchinson discussing how to hide the truth from auditors. One email, sent at 2:47 a.m. from Theodore to his CFO, was particularly damning. Remember, this is temporary. Once we close the global net deal next quarter, we reverse everything. Nobody will ever know. Rebecca photographed every page with her phone. Then she sat in that office for an hour, trying to reconcile the criminal evidence in her hands with the man she'd married 7 years earlier. The man who'd promised to build something legitimate, something their children could be proud of. She waited until the twins were asleep. Theodore was in his study, drinking scotch and reviewing market reports. Rebecca placed the Project Phoenix folder on his desk. "What's this?" she asked, though she already knew. Theodore glanced at the folder and his expression shifted from confusion to fury in seconds. "You went through my locked desk? That's your concern? That I went through your desk? Not that you're committing securities fraud? You don't understand. I'm a securities lawyer, Theodore. I understand exactly what this is. 2.3 billion in fake revenue, 800 million in hidden expenses. This isn't aggressive accounting. It's criminal fraud." Theodore stood, his face flushing red. "Everything I do is for this family, for our future. You think your old family money will last forever? You think the twins can live off your trust fund? I'm building an empire. You're building a house of cards. And when it collapses, and it will collapse, you'll go to federal prison, 25 years minimum, for fraud at this scale." "It's temporary," Theodore shouted. "Next quarter. There's always a next quarter. Always one more deal, one more lie to cover the last lie. When does it stop?" "When I say it stops, this is my company, and we're your family, or have you forgotten that?" Theodore's voice dropped to a dangerous level. "My family lives in a $40 million penthouse because of me. My family flies private because of me. My family has everything because of what I built. Your family has a father who's never home, and a husband who's become a stranger. Your children don't know you, and now I discover their father is a criminal. How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth. Someone has to, because you're so deep in your own lies you can't see reality anymore. You want to judge me? You've benefited from every single deal, every acquisition, every success. That jewelry you're wearing? That came from Nexus. The private schools for the twins? Nexus. Your entire life is built on my success. Then I'll give it all back, every penny. If it means the twins don't have to visit their father in federal prison." Theodore swept everything off his desk in one violent motion. Papers flew, his laptop crashed to the floor. The Scotch glass shattered against the wall. "Get out," he screamed. "You think you're so righteous? So pure? You knew what I was when you married me. Driven, ambitious, willing to do whatever it takes. That's what you claim to love. But now when it gets difficult, when I need support, you turn on me. I fell in love with someone who wanted to build something real. Not this. Fraud, get out of my life. You want to abandon me when I need you most. Fine, take your judgment, take your righteousness, and get out. But you'll get nothing. No money, no custody, nothing. I'll bury you in legal fees until you beg." Rebecca turned and walked out, leaving Theodore raging in his study. What would you do if you discovered your spouse was committing crimes that could destroy thousands of lives? Would you stay silent to protect your family's wealth, or would you risk everything to stop them? Comment below with what choice you'd make. But remember, Rebecca's decision would shock everyone, including Theodore himself. That night, while Theodore drank himself into unconsciousness in his study, Rebecca made her preparations. She'd been planning for weeks, sensing something was catastrophically wrong even before finding the documents. She'd opened bank accounts Theodore didn't know about, obtained copies of critical documents, researched how people disappeared when they needed to. She packed methodically, not like someone fleeing, but like someone who'd never return. Essential documents for her and the twins, hard drives containing financial records, photo albums that couldn't be replaced. She took exactly $2 million from their joint account, enough to establish a new life, but not enough to trigger immediate alerts. Most importantly, she packed the Project Phoenix documents and the photographed evidence on multiple encrypted drives. She made copies and mailed them to 3 different locations, including a lawyer in Washington, D.C., who specialized in whistleblower protection. By 4 a.m., everything was ready. The twins were dressed and in the car, still sleeping. Rebecca looked back at the penthouse one last time, then drove into the pre-dawn darkness, knowing she'd just made a choice that would destroy the man she once loved, and save thousands of innocent people in the process. Rebecca moved through the penthouse like a ghost, each step calculated to avoid the creaking floorboards she'd memorized over 7 years. From the study came the sound of Theodore's ragged breathing. He'd passed out in his leather chair, surrounded by empty bottles and scattered financial reports. She went to the twins' room first. Daniel and Grace, 5 years old, trusted her completely. When she whispered they were going on an adventure, she'd told them earlier that week about a special trip, just the 3 of them. They didn't question why Daddy wasn't coming. He never came on trips anymore. The security system would show she left at 4:23 a.m. She disabled the interior cameras. Theodore had taught her how, ironically, in case of emergencies. This qualified. She loaded the Range Rover methodically. 3 suitcases, 2 backpacks, a box of the twins' favorite toys. Everything else, the designer clothes, the jewelry, the trappings of wealth, stayed behind. In the garage, she transferred everything to a Honda Accord she'd purchased with cash 2 weeks earlier, registered under a different name. The Range Rover would be found at JFK Airport's long-term parking 3 days later, a false trail suggesting international flight. But Rebecca and the twins were already heading north on Interstate 87, toward Canada, toward a new existence Theodore would never find. She left the note on the kitchen counter where he'd find it when he looked for his morning coffee. Her handwriting, usually elegant, was deliberately plain. Theodore, I won't let our children grow up visiting their father in federal prison. I won't let them watch you destroy yourself and everyone around you. You told me to get out of your life. I'm honoring that request. Don't look for us. You won't find us. If you truly care about Daniel and Grace, you'll let us go. They deserve a chance at normal lives, away from what you've become. I love the man you were. I mourn the man you could have been. But I cannot save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Rebecca. She didn't sign it, your wife. That relationship had ended the moment he screamed at her to leave. Theodore woke at 11 a.m. with a crushing headache and a mouth that tasted like death. The penthouse was silent, unusual for a Saturday when the twins typically watched cartoons. He stumbled to the kitchen, saw the note, read it twice before the words registered. The rage came first. He tore through the penthouse, confirming what he already knew. Their closets were partially empty, their favorite toys gone. Her jewelry remained. She'd left hundreds of thousands of dollars in diamonds and gold, taking only her grandmother's simple wedding ring. He called her cell phone. Disconnected. Her email bounced back. Her credit cards showed no activity. The Range Rover's GPS placed it at JFK, but security footage would later reveal she'd never entered the airport. She'd learned from the best. Theodore himself had taught her about operational security during his paranoid phases. Within hours, he'd hired Black Mountain Securities, a private investigation firm that specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. James Morrison, the lead investigator and former FBI agent, would later testify that Theodore had been obsessed, to the point of instability, with locating his family. "Find them," Theodore had demanded, sliding a check for $500,000 across the table. "I don't care what it costs. I don't care what you have to do. Find my wife and children." But Rebecca had vanished with the thoroughness of someone who'd been planning for months. The trail went cold in Montreal. Some evidence suggested Switzerland. Other clues pointed to New Zealand. Each lead cost Theodore tens of thousands of dollars and led nowhere. Meanwhile, Nexus Communications needed its CEO. The board was asking questions about his erratic behavior. Investors wondered why he looked haggard during video conferences. The fraud he'd initiated required constant management to maintain. Theodore Brennan, who'd controlled every aspect of his empire, had lost control of the only thing that truly mattered. And in trying to find what he'd lost, he'd missed the signs that his empire was about to collapse entirely. Without Rebecca's presence to anchor him, Theodore transformed Nexus headquarters into a fortress of suspicion. He installed military-grade encryption on all communications, hired former NSA specialists to monitor employee activities, and required anyone entering his office to surrender their phones in signal-blocking pouches. Executive meetings moved to a windowless conference room he called the Vault, where white noise generators prevented electronic eavesdropping. He trusted no one, convinced that short sellers had planted spies throughout his company. When his head of investor relations suggested more transparency might calm market concerns, Theodore fired him on the spot, accusing him of working for competitors. He hired 3 different security teams, each unaware of the others, to follow his remaining executives. Weekend retreats and team-building events ended. In their place came mandatory polygraph tests for senior staff, administered quarterly to ensure loyalty. 12 senior executives resigned in 2016 alone, citing philosophical differences in carefully worded statements their lawyers had crafted. Theodore stopped attending public events, conducting all meetings via encrypted video from secure locations. He moved between 3 different properties each week, never sleeping in the same place more than 2 nights consecutively. The man who'd once charmed investors over dinner now communicated only through prepared statements read by spokespeople. What began as a desperate attempt to survive one quarter mutated into an elaborate architecture of deception that would make previous corporate scandals look amateur. By 2017, Project Phoenix had evolved into Project Olympus, a fraud so complex that even the perpetrators struggled to track all its components. The initial $2.3 billion in fake revenue grew to $8 billion by 2016, then $16 billion by 2018. Theodore and Hutchinson created an entire ecosystem of fictional companies, technology suppliers that didn't exist, infrastructure contractors that never built anything, customer service centers that were nothing but mail drops in Delaware. They hired actors to play executives during video conferences with auditors, created fake LinkedIn profiles for hundreds of non-existent employees, and manufactured an entire parallel universe where Nexus was thriving. The expense manipulation became equally elaborate. They created a category called future value investments that could absorb any cost without affecting current earnings. $17 billion in operating losses were transformed into strategic asset positions. Failed acquisitions were kept on the books at full value, their losses hidden through Byzantine accounting that would take forensic specialists years to untangle. By 2019, the reported revenue of $67 billion contained only $30 billion in real transactions. The rest existed solely in spreadsheets, in fabricated contracts, in the testimony of bribed auditors who'd been paid millions to look the other way. Theodore justified each escalation by pointing to the next quarter when everything would be fixed. the perpetual tomorrow that never came. The fraud required constant maintenance. Every lie needed two more to support it. Fake customers needed fake payment histories. Fictional infrastructure needed fake maintenance records. The accounting team grew from 5 conspirators to 43, each bound by non-disclosure agreements and the knowledge that exposing the fraud would destroy their own careers. The human cost of maintaining this deception manifested in Theodore's deteriorating health. By 2018, he'd lost 30 pounds, his face gaunt and gray despite the best medical care money could buy. He survived on 4 hours of sleep, supplemented by prescription stimulants that his private physician supplied without questions. His hands developed a tremor that worsened during earnings calls. He started wearing glasses to hide eyes that were constantly bloodshot. His famous commanding voice became hoarse from the cigarettes he'd started smoking again after 15 years, 2 packs a day by 2019. During one board meeting, he excused himself 3 times to vomit, claiming food poisoning when it was actually stress-induced gastritis that would later require surgery. The mental toll was equally severe. Theodore could no longer distinguish between his manufactured reality and actual facts. He'd quote fictional revenue figures in private conversations, seeming to believe them himself. When Hutchinson reminded him of the real numbers during one planning session, Theodore accused him of disloyalty, of trying to sabotage the company with negativity. He developed obsessive rituals, checking stock prices every 3 minutes, reviewing the same spreadsheets dozens of times daily, calling Singapore at 3 a.m. to confirm trades that had been confirmed hours earlier. His office became a maze of monitors displaying market data, news feeds, internal metrics, a digital cocoon where he could pretend everything was under control. Sleep brought no relief. He dreamed of federal agents, of handcuffs, of Rebecca standing in a courtroom describing his crimes. He'd wake screaming numbers, stock prices, revenue targets, the federal sentencing guidelines for securities fraud. His housekeeper found him once at dawn, fully dressed in a suit, presenting an earnings report to an empty boardroom, practicing for a meeting that wasn't scheduled for weeks. The empire he'd built to ensure he'd never be powerless had become his prison, and somewhere, Rebecca was building a case that would make that prison literal. March 15, 2020. Theodore had been awake since 4 a.m., reviewing quarterly projections that grew more fictional with each revision. The pandemic had just begun shutting down businesses worldwide, providing convenient cover for Nexus's declining performance. He was calculating how to blame COVID for problems that predated the virus by years when his personal phone rang. Not his business phone, not the encrypted device for board members. His personal phone, a number only 6 people knew. The caller ID showed blocked, but something in his gut recognized the significance. His hand trembled as he answered. Hello, Theodore. 5 years of searching. 5 years of private investigators, international lawyers, and false leads. 5 years since he'd heard Rebecca's voice. It hadn't changed, still measured, still controlled, still capable of stopping his world with 2 words. Rebecca? His voice cracked like a teenager's. Where are you? That's not why I'm calling, she cut him off. I'm calling because you deserve to know what's about to happen. In 6 hours, at exactly noon Eastern Time, the SEC and FBI will raid Nexus headquarters. They'll also raid your homes in New York, Connecticut, and Florida simultaneously. Theodore's blood turned to ice. What are you talking about? I'm talking about Project Phoenix, Project Olympus, and the 17 other fraudulent schemes you've run over the past 5 years. They have everything, Theodore. Every document, every email, every falsified contract. That's impossible. The security protocols. Your security protected you from outside threats. It didn't protect you from me. The room started spinning. You went to the authorities? 5 years ago, the night I left. I gave them everything from Project Phoenix, but that was just the beginning. You've been feeding them information for 5 years? Every quarter, every fraudulent earnings report, every fake customer you created, every dollar you hid. I had access to your systems, remember? You gave me that access yourself. Back when you trusted me to review contracts, you never revoked it. Theodore's mind raced through the implications. The encrypted communications. I had the encryption keys. You kept them in the same safe where you kept the children's birth certificates. Did you think I wouldn't remember the combination? Our anniversary date, though I doubt you remember when that was anymore. This is insane. You're my wife. Spousal privilege. Doesn't apply to ongoing criminal conspiracies. And technically we're not married anymore. I filed for divorce 3 years ago. You were served through publication in 3 newspapers. You never responded, so the court granted a default judgment. I've been legally single since 2018. Theodore felt his world collapsing. Why wait 5 years? Why not turn me in immediately? Because I wanted them to have everything. A complete case. No room for plea bargains. No chance of walking away with a slap on the wrist. You needed to be stopped. But more importantly, everyone involved needed to be stopped. Hutchinson, the entire accounting team, the board members who looked the other way, they're all going down with you. You destroyed me. No, Theodore, you destroyed yourself. I just documented it. She'd played the long game, gathering evidence for 5 years while Theodore thought he was untouchable. Think about that level of patience, that commitment to justice. How many people would have just taken the money and run? But Rebecca chose something harder. She chose to ensure he could never hurt anyone else. What would you have done in her position? The full weight of Rebecca's revelation crashed down on Theodore. 5 years of evidence meant she hadn't just captured Project Phoenix. She had everything that came after. Every evolution of the fraud, every attempt to cover previous lies with new ones, every criminal decision he'd made thinking he was safe in his fortress of paranoia. They'll have warrants for everything, Rebecca continued. Your computers, servers, even the backup drives you keep in the safety deposit boxes under false names. Oh yes, I know about those too. Bank account 471 minus 89,903 in the Caymans, account 7,789A in Switzerland. The shell company in Ireland you use to funnel money. They have it all. Hutchinson will flip, Theodore said, more to himself than to her. He already has. He's been cooperating for 18 months. So have Brenner from accounting and Morrison from legal. You surrounded yourself with criminals, Theodore, and criminals always save themselves first. Theodore collapsed into his chair, 45 years old, and he was looking at spending the rest of his life in federal prison. The empire he'd killed himself building would be dissolved within days. The legacy he'd wanted to leave for his children would be nothing but shame and newspaper headlines. How did I not see this coming? Because you stopped seeing anything except what you wanted to see. You created your own reality and then believed it was true. The twins, Theodore said desperately. Let me see them one more time. Let me explain. They don't know you exist, Rebecca said flatly. As far as Daniel and Grace are concerned, their father died when they were babies. They're happy, Theodore. They go to normal schools, have normal friends, live normal lives. They'll never know about Nexus, about the fraud, about any of this. You can't erase me from their lives. You erased yourself when you chose your company over your family, when you screamed at me to get out of your life, remember? I was just following your instructions. Rebecca, please. I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you. But they're my children. They were your children. Now they're just 2 kids who deserve better than a father serving life in federal prison. Where are you? At least tell me that we're safe, we're happy, we're free from you and everything you represent. That's all you need to know. I'll find you. Even from prison, No, you won't. As part of my cooperation agreement, we're in witness protection. New names, new location, new everything. Even I couldn't find us if I wanted to. This is the last time you'll ever hear my voice." Theodore's desperation turned to rage. "You sanctimonious. You lived off my success for years, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for not stopping you sooner. Goodbye, Theodore. When they arrest you in 6 hours, try to maintain some dignity. If not for yourself, then for the memory of the man you used to be." "Rebecca, wait." The line went dead. Theodore immediately tried calling back, but the number was already disconnected. He sat in his office, surrounded by monitors showing fake success, holding a phone that would never ring again with the voice of someone who'd once loved him. 6 hours. He had 6 hours before his entire world collapsed. Some men might have run. Others might have destroyed evidence. Theodore Brennan did what he'd always done. He went to his computer and started working on the next quarterly report, maintaining the fiction until the very last moment. At exactly noon Eastern Time, 300 federal agents executed synchronized raids across 7 states. The main assault targeted Nexus headquarters in Manhattan, where employees watched in shock as FBI agents and SEC investigators flooded through the lobby past security into elevators normally reserved for executives. They came prepared. Evidence teams wheeled in empty boxes by the dozen. Computer forensics specialists carried specialized equipment for imaging hard drives. Financial crimes investigators brought lists of specific documents, specific computers, specific offices to target. This wasn't a fishing expedition. They knew exactly what they were looking for and where to find it. Theodore stood in his 52nd floor office, watching through his window as news vans gathered on the street below. His lawyer had called at 11:58 to warn him, but there was nowhere to run. Federal agents entered his office with a warrant 40 pages long, listing every crime he'd committed in excruciating detail. "Mr. Brennan," the lead agent said, "please step away from your computer. I need to call my lawyer. You can do that from our offices. Right now, you need to come with us." They didn't handcuff him in the building, a small mercy that would be splashed across every newspaper anyway. But employees lined the halls as he was escorted out, their faces mixing shock, anger, and the dawning realization that their jobs were gone. The stock market reacted before the first box of evidence left the building. At 12:03 p.m., with news of the raid breaking on financial networks, Nexus Communications stock began its death plunge. It had closed the previous Friday at $127 per share, supported entirely by fraudulent earnings reports. Within 10 minutes of the raid news, it hit $90. Trading was halted at 12:18 p.m. when it reached $72, triggering automatic circuit breakers. When trading resumed at 12:48 p.m., the real carnage began. Major institutional investors dumped their positions at any price. Pension funds that had invested billions watched their holdings evaporate. The stock hit $50 at 1 p.m., $30 at 2 p.m. By market close, Nexus Communications, once valued at $47 billion, was trading at $8 per share. The after-hours market was even more brutal, with preliminary reports suggesting fraud exceeding $30 billion. The stock fell to $3. Bondholders rushed to court seeking emergency injunctions to freeze assets. Credit agencies downgraded Nexus debt to junk status, triggering automatic sell-offs from funds that could only hold investment-grade securities. $47 billion in market value disappeared in 8 hours. Financial historians would later call it the fastest single-company collapse in NYSE history. The Connecticut Pension Fund alone lost $4 billion. The Texas Teachers' Retirement System lost $2.8 billion. Countless individual investors who'd believed in Theodore's vision lost their life savings. By Monday morning, the arrests had begun in earnest. Robert Hutchinson, the CFO who'd orchestrated the fraud at Theodore's direction, was taken into custody at his Westchester home at 6 a.m. He'd already negotiated a cooperation agreement through his lawyer, trading testimony for a reduced sentence. "Brennan gave me direct orders," Hutchinson would tell investigators in his first recorded interview. He said make the numbers, work, or find another job. He knew exactly what he was asking for. I have emails, recorded phone calls, everything. The head of accounting, Michael Brenner, no relation to Theodore, was arrested at LaGuardia Airport trying to board a flight to Costa Rica. He immediately offered to cooperate, providing investigators with USB drives containing 5 years of internal communications about the fraud. Patricia Coleman, Theodore's longtime assistant, wasn't arrested but provided devastating testimony. She handed over appointment calendars showing Theodore had personally attended every meeting where fraudulent numbers were discussed. She had recordings of him berating employees who questioned the accounting. She had copies of documents he'd annotated with instructions to hide losses. Within 72 hours, 37 executives had been arrested or surrendered to authorities. The Nexus Legal Department, which had once employed 200 attorneys, now consisted of 3 lawyers trying to manage bankruptcy proceedings, while their former colleagues faced criminal charges. The board of directors, claiming ignorance despite years of rubber-stamping Theodore's decisions, resigned en masse. Several would face civil lawsuits from shareholders, with 2 eventually pleading guilty to criminal negligence charges. Each arrest brought new revelations. The head of sales admitted to creating 700 fake customers. The head of European operations confessed to inflating asset valuations by 300%. The chief technology officer revealed that the company's celebrated new infrastructure existed only on paper. The company that Theodore Brennan had spent 17 years building collapsed entirely in less than a week. 85,000 employees lost their jobs. Hundreds of vendors went unpaid. Decades of pension contributions vanished. The Nexus headquarters building, once a symbol of American business success, would stand empty for 3 years before being converted to apartments, its corporate logos removed in the dark of night to avoid news cameras. The United States v. Theodore Brennan began September 7, 2021, in the Southern District of New York. The prosecution presented 93 witnesses over 6 weeks, building a case that one journalist called overwhelming to the point of redundancy. The most damaging testimony came from within. Hutchinson detailed 53 separate meetings where Theodore explicitly ordered fraud. He produced recordings from his phone where Theodore said, "I don't care if it's legal. I care if it works." The accounting team described a culture where questioning numbers meant losing your job. Former board members admitted they'd suspected fraud but chose to stay silent rather than challenge the CEO who'd made them rich. But it was Patricia Coleman's testimony that humanized the destruction. She described watching Theodore transform from a leader who knew every janitor's name to a man who fired people by email. She told the jury about employees who'd mortgaged their homes to buy Nexus stock because they believed in Theodore's vision. She read a suicide note from a 62-year-old engineer who'd lost his entire retirement when the company collapsed. The defense tried to argue Theodore had acted under extreme pressure, that he'd believed the fraud was temporary, that others had executed the schemes. But against 93 witnesses and thousands of documents, these arguments crumbled. The jury deliberated for only 3 days, guilty on all 23 counts. On December 15, 2021, Judge Margaret Harrison delivered Theodore's sentence. Her statement would be quoted in law schools for years. "Mr. Brennan, you possessed everything our society claims to value: wealth, power, intelligence, opportunity. Yet you wanted more, always more, and in pursuing it you destroyed thousands of lives. You stole from pension funds, from retirees, from your own employees who trusted you. You perverted the American dream into an American nightmare. This court sentences you to 45 years in federal prison. You will have decades to contemplate how a man who had everything lost it all through greed." Theodore stood silent as the sentence was read. The boy from Youngstown who'd conquered Wall Street would die in federal prison. Theodore Brennan serves his sentence at the Federal Correctional Institution in Otisville, New York. He works in the prison library, maintains no visitors list, and has declined all interview requests. Other inmates call him the professor and largely leave him alone. Rebecca Morrison lives under a new identity in an undisclosed location. Sources suggest she works for an international financial crimes unit, using her experience to help prosecute corporate fraud. She has never spoken publicly about Theodore or Nexus. Daniel and Grace, now 15, excel in their respective schools. Daniel shows aptitude for environmental engineering, while Grace has won regional science fairs with projects on renewable energy. They know their father died when they were young, nothing more. Robert Hutchinson received 12 years after cooperating. He teaches accounting to other inmates, warning them about the slow slide from aggressive to criminal. Nexus Communications exists only in bankruptcy court documents and business school case studies, a monument to how quickly an empire can fall when built on lies. In 2024, investigators discovered a storage unit Theodore had rented under an alias. Inside were 43 letters he'd written, but never sent, to Rebecca, to Daniel and Grace, to employees he'd wronged. Each one began the same way. I know you'll never read this, but the letter to his children, dated on their 13th birthday, revealed the depth of his realization. I built an empire for you, but lost you building it. I wanted to leave you wealth, but instead left you shame. Your mother saved you from me, and for that I'm grateful. Live the honest lives I couldn't. These letters remain sealed in federal evidence, undelivered testimonies to regret that came too late. Theodore Brennan's story proves that success without integrity is just failure waiting to happen. Every shortcut, every compromise, every lie told to preserve an image only accelerates the inevitable collapse. The man who screamed "Get out of my life" to his family ended up alone, his life reduced to a cautionary tale studied in business schools worldwide. This story makes you think, what would you sacrifice for success? And more importantly, what wouldn't you sacrifice? Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts on Theodore's downfall. Was Rebecca right to wait 5 years, building an airtight case, or should she have acted sooner? And if this story reminded you that integrity matters more than income, that family beats fortune every time, hit that subscribe button. Because every week, we bring you real stories that reveal the true cost of choices, the price of power, and the value of what really matters. Remember, empires built on lies always fall. The only question is who they take down with them.